Hello there, and welcome to the Untitled Film Podcast with Callum and Johnny. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Callum.
And this is a very special episode.
Is it particularly special compared to the other episodes?
I'm going to say it is. This week we will be talking about music
Biopics? I guess, although one is negligible, whether you call it a biopic or not.
Well, one could almost be a musical.
It could be. And the other one, well, I don't want to spoil what we're going to talk about, so let's save that. But biopics is probably the best word that we can use for the moment.
Musical biopic.
Yes.
Anywho, that is the things that we're going to be talking about this week.
Should we mention what films they are?
Shall we? Should we? Oh, we might as well. This is the thing like Conan did once. Conan was like, because obviously the thing with Conan, they always have the dung, 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 dung. Hi, I'm Jason Bateman, and I'm going to be trying to be Conan. I'm feeling...
And I'm Conan's best pal.
Frothy about being Conan's best pal. That thing. And then Conan once was like, well, we don't want to ruin the surprise if he was on the episode. And they were like, we literally tell you at the start of the episode, and it tells you on the title of the podcast. And they were like, oh, yeah. Well, so I feel we might as well just say.
We might as well. And it is going to be the title. So we're going to be talking about the new-ish Baz Luhrmann film, Elvis, about Elvis Costello.
Yeah, everyone loves Elvis Costello. He is really cool.
He's pretty awesome.
With his glasses and his songs.
We're a big fan of Elvis Costello in this house.
Yeah. Not so big fans of Tom Hanks, but...
No. And in the Elvis Costello movie, that Tom Hanks, whoa.
I know, he plays Liza Minnelli.
I know, it's a pretty radical casting choice, I'll give him that.
It really is, but I think he hams it up a little bit too much.
And we're also going to be talking about Love and Mercy, which is about the creation of Rubber Soul.
Exactly. And the war between John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
It's an exciting film.
It really is.
Who knew that Paul Dano could pull off a Liverpudlian accent?
I know, but it makes sense picking someone called Paul to play someone called Paul.
But he plays John.
No.
Yeah.
John Cusack plays John, because he's called John.
Ah, that makes sense.
Come on, Callum, get it right.
I mean, the age difference is a bit weird.
Yeah, but I think they're such good actors. I don't think you should cast for age or race or gender. You should just cast
the right people for the right roles.
Yeah, and I think they do such a good job of it that anyway, we don't want to review the films too much before we get into them.
And should we stop messing the audience around?
I think they're smart enough to know
to get what's going on.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. Dear Untitled Film Podcast, it wasn't about Elvis Costello at all. I'm unsubscribing.
Yours sincerely, A. Tit.
Yours sincerely, Dog Brain Videos.
Anyway, good thing that Paul Dano's Liverpudlian accent's better than your Northern accent.
That wasn't really an attempt at a Northern accent. It was just a whiny accent.
Well, you've just called everyone in the North whiny then, so well done, Callum. Well done.
Yes.
Anyway, on from Callum slandering half the country to let's talk about the thing that we use to get our message out to the world that's other than the podcast itself.
Yes, so you can find us on Instagram and Facebook on Untitled Film Podcast, one word, and we're also on YouTube now. So please do, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go to our Instagram page, send us a message, like a bunch of our stuff.
Comment on the videos.
Comment on anything that we post. And if you're a spam bot, please stop giving us messages like, promote it here.
But if you are one of the other podcasts that follows us, that follow for following things, welcome, and we will enjoy listening to your podcast too, and let's collab.
Yes, and thank you for liking our stuff. Thank you for joining our Instagram page. It's been really cool to see new people joining and getting on board. So thank you to everyone who has liked, subscribed, joined, messaged,
and comment. And we do read the comments out, and we do start discussions and things based on them.
Absolutely,
as Dog Brain Videos found out last week with our Scooby-Doo inspired,
much to his
message.
Dismay.
Wow. I think he liked it. Anywho, on from that, we are going into a segment. And before we do that, I'm just going to turn Callum's microphone off.
No!
We're going to talk about the news. No.
They can't hear me. I promise I won't do that anymore.
Now we need to make sure the levels are right.
And you're going to turn me back on?
I've turned you back on.
I can't hear. Oh, ow.
There we go. Yeah. He's back.
If people couldn't hear that, it's because it went a bit too loud and it was shouting in my ear.
Anywho, if you can start with your first piece of news, if you'd like.
Well, yes. It has to be said that this week is a little bit of a slow week. And whenever it's a little bit of a slow week, Johnny or I tends to talk about box office. And this week's exciting box office news is that Avatar has finally been dethroned as the number one film, at least in the United States. And there are two films. It's now number 3. So the two new films to come out is M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin and the film 80 for Brady, which I think is going to be a lot more of an American thing because it's about the big American football star Tom Brady. And both films have performed sort of okay. They're soft, middling, but they only have a budget of $20 million for Knock and I think $28 million for 80 for Brady. And they've both opened to around 14 to 13 million, which I think both films were probably hoping for more. But in the end, when all is said and done, they'll probably both break even. So nothing to write home about this week in terms of box office news, but at least Avatar is finally no longer hogging that number one top spot.
What an interesting piece of news there. It's so interesting.
I'm so sorry. But it's February and there's not a lot going on right now.
Well, I beg to differ.
Oh, yeah?
So rewind a few months and I was complaining about... Don't make noises.
That's me rewinding.
I was complaining about Disney cancelling lots of Marvel TV shows. There was a bit of Kevin Feige pushed the head of TV out, and there was a lot of things that certainly hadn't been announced as renewed, and a lot of speculation about cancellations. One of those things was Hit Monkey, which I really, really enjoyed, with Jason Sudeikis playing a dead assassin guiding a snow monkey through kind of his revenge, I suppose. And the first series was really good, frankly. It was very funny, it was very satirical, very gory and interesting. It was something kind of a bit out of the main Marvel mould, which was all very family-friendly cookie cutter. And Hulu have just announced a second season of it.
Oh, good. Good.
So announced 18 months after the original came out, which definitely shows warning signs and that it maybe wasn't coming back at one point, but some decision seems to have been reversed and Hit Monkey's coming back. So whether it had I don't know if it maybe had good streaming numbers on Disney Plus or what the reasoning behind it is, but that's good to see.
That is pretty good. That's good news. I'm glad to hear about that.
Indeed.
Because we don't want to... It's so common now for new television to be lost media. Like, you know how back in the day, there would be episodes of Doctor Who that would be lost to time because people record over the masters because they never thought that anybody is going to watch Doctor Who 50 years down the line.
Or Dad's Armies, and then someone finds like a really old, dodgy recording of it and they try and splice it back together to relive the glory days of the past.
And that was sort of expected, but now we're living in an age where a new cartoon or a new TV show can be here today and completely erased. I mean, the fact that Minx only barely by the skin of its teeth got saved is just such a shocking indictment on how streaming services today are working. I mean, I don't want to go off into too big of a tangent, but Netflix are starting to burn all their bridges by stopping the password sharing, and people are very annoyed about that. But anyway, that is a tangent. My second bit of news, there is going to be an adaptation of a Stephen King book, and it's going to be produced by J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot and Leonardo DiCaprio's Appian Way. And what tends to happen is that these production companies, they snatch up every sort of best-selling book going with the inkling, the thoughts that maybe somewhere down the line, 4 or 5 years from now, J.J. Abrams might direct, Leonardo DiCaprio might star, but what will probably happen is that they'll both get too busy.
The rights will lapse.
The rights will lapse, and if it is made, they'll stay on as producers, and it'll be cast with someone else. And J.J. Abrams, he'll be a producer in the way that, green light, cool, go for that.
Well, it'll be a bit of like a 10 Cloverfield Lane kind of situation, probably, where they'll go, let's just sell it to Netflix or whatever.
Yeah, stick Godzilla in that. That will make it sell.
What you didn't say is which of Stephen King's books it is that they're
No, I didn't.
adapting.
Sorry.
I know he churns 17 out a year, but
this one is Billy Summers. Apparently, according to some of the comments, it's a bit of a Jack Reacher clone, so it's more action, less horror. So it's more, and I think that probably appeals to a fading and aging movie star like Leonardo DiCaprio, who wants to have his Tom Cruise moment.
I mean, that's what everyone wants to see, a Jack Reacher-style TV show or film starring an aging playboy by a horror writer.
By a horror writer directed by the guy who did the Star Trek reboot.
And Star Wars.
And Star Wars. The interesting
anything Star reboot.
Yes, about it is that one of the screenwriters Deadline has said Ed Zwick. Oops, sorry, banged the table.
Wow, Callum, can you stop hitting the microphone? You always do this.
But they don't say Edward Zwick, because Edward Zwick, of course, try saying that very fast, is the director of a whole bunch of movies like Glory in the 90s, and a lot of big movies from the 90s. I think he's nominated at least for a couple of Oscars. But they don't. I'm not sure if it's someone else, because I tried to look on IMDb to see if there was like a Ed Zwick sort of thing. But I think it might be the same guy, which seems like a bit of a downgrade for an Oscar-nominated director to be writing a subpar Stephen King book, possibly for Leonardo DiCaprio somewhere down the line. He seems like he should be directing it himself. But anyway, maybe Ed Zwick has fallen out of fashion in Hollywood. Defiance didn't do banging box office numbers, I know that.
Or maybe he's writing it on plane journeys in between doing directing roles.
Hopefully, because I like Ed Zwick, and he sort of deserves better. He directed The Last Samurai, for example. And I like that film.
Yeah, fair enough. And my last piece of news this week is there is a new exciting sitcom called Nothing Forever.
Okay.
Have you heard about this?
No, I have not.
It is a spin-off of the hit 90s show Seinfeld.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it is the world's first AI-produced TV show.
Oh, I have heard about this. I didn't realise that was the title.
Yeah, it's being shown on Twitch, and it's produced by machine learning, generative algorithms, and cloud services. It has already amassed 83,000 followers as of early Thursday morning. So what we're on now, Sunday. So probably a lot more, with up to 11,000 viewers taking a look at any time. What a world we're living in. It's seeping into everything, this is
weird... like an iRobot sort of future that we're going to be living in soon.
It's kind of happened so quick, because the first I kind of knew of it was that we would do like weird paintings. Like last year there was that.
Yes, and then
DALL-E.
GPT came along about 6 months ago.
Yeah, and then now they just seem to be able to put in like make a video with, I don't know, Jerry Seinfeld telling some Jerry Seinfeld jokes, and it seems to be able to create a deep fake with perfect voice tones and
that's creepy. Does it have a joke what's the deal with etc. etc.?
I would assume so. I haven't watched it yet, but maybe I will. Maybe I will try it later on, because I do like Seinfeld.
It's the spur to maybe watch it.
It is a weird thing though, and if they manage to make AI really good, and really kind of understanding of human emotions and understanding of like writing techniques and all these things, will it get to a point where, I'm pretty sure this will be distinguishable from a real thing, but will it get to a point where it is indistinguishable, and how quick will that happen? And then what happens?
Scary thing. I mean, will it put people out of work?
Yeah. If you're NBC and you want to make a sitcom, maybe you employ someone, a showrunner, to come up with the name and to format it. But after that, like, why would you hire a room of temperamental, expensive writers who complain about working hours and go on strike when they don't get healthcare and money, and like to eat snacks and fart and things, when you could just have one guy who inputs some data into a computer, presses a button, and then takes the script to the actors? It's
a scary, scary world we're living in, I think.
Yeah, I think actors will be fine.
Well, of course, they need someone to perform it.
Well, in theory, it could just create like CGI people and things, but I think people will want to see real people. I think people
will want to see real people.
But will they need to have This is actually quite an interesting philosophical question. So, obviously, the automation of things has always been happening. You know, the automation of like production lines and factories, and it's always putting people out of work. But now this automation has moved into the creative fields. People are starting to get really worried about it all of a sudden because it might take creative jobs away. What about all the people that worked in the factories, and what about all the people that did other things in the past?
It's true.
It's quite a deep philosophical question.
It's weird to see how quickly it's moved along. Like I was watching a Patton Oswalt show from I think about 2007, and he was talking about the saddest robots in the world. Have you seen these? These are the robots in the supermarket that you scan food on them, and they say 85 cents for, and like that's not that's been around forever, hasn't it? But of course it hasn't. It's just that when this show came out, it was only a year or so old.
Yeah, I remember when they first did that, and again, I mean, how many people used to be standing on tills at the front of supermarkets that aren't there anymore?
What's the use of them now if you can just go and scan it yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
Scary.
Strange times. Anyway, on to more olden times.
Yes. Yeah. Great segue. Fantastic. Yeah.
There once was a guy called Elvis. Shall I take this intro? Onto our first movie. There was once a guy called Elvis.
And did he have a moving pelvis?
Elvis the Pelvis, that some would call him.
Some would.
He was a young boy from a poor family with a dad who'd been to jail. But he loved blues music. And he decided he was going to sing blues music to the world. And he met up with a guy called Tom. He was like, I know, I can sell your pelvis and your blues to the world, young boy. And together, they made millions. That's
very good. Yes.
That's the Elvis movie.
That's the sum up.
Elvis, of course, is the new Baz Luhrmann movie, famous for Moulin Rouge and Strictly Ballroom and Great Gatsby. I kind of felt like this channeled The Great Gatsby probably most of all of his movies, and kind of felt more in tune with that. I think it's the first biopic he's done. Australia was wasn't really a biopic.
Australia wasn't a biopic.
No, it was kind of meant to, I suppose,
it was meant to be about a real time.
Yeah, but not real people.
Were fictional.
It's not a musical as such, but it is would you call it a jukebox movie?
I wouldn't, just because it's more...
It's closer to Walk the Line than it is to Rocket Man.
Yeah, exactly.
I would agree. And it is very Baz Luhrmann. It feels very Baz Luhrmann, particularly from the start of the movie, and then maybe slightly less as the movie goes on. But yeah, I think that's all you guys need to know. You know who Elvis is. If you don't know who Elvis is, don't listen to my podcast. Like, he's a person that everyone should know. It's like saying...
Weirdly hostile.
Well, I mean, anyone who hasn't heard the name Elvis, it would shock me. I don't. You don't have to like him. I'm not saying you have to like him,
but he's so ubiquitous.
Or even know, he's so ubiquitous. It's like not knowing the color purple.
Yeah, deep into the pop culture lexicon.
Yeah,
that you can't not know him.
Exactly. Anyway, what did you think?
Well, the Baz Luhrmann stuff, you said that, you summed it up there, that it starts very Baz Luhrmann and then it calms down. And that's very true, because the first 15 minutes, there are swirling cameras and colors and neon, and your eyes are being assaulted. And for the first 15 minutes, I was begging the movie to just calm down. But luckily, unlike, say, something like The Great Gatsby, which was all Baz all the time throughout, and also something like Moulin Rouge, which is all Baz all the time, but seems to work better. You don't mind that you're being assaulted, I find.
I think it works in Moulin Rouge because it's meant to be a stage thing. Exactly. It's not meant to be a biopic about someone's life.
Exactly. But thankfully it does. Thankfully, once it calms down, it does, and it plays by the rules of a fairly conventional biopic, even if the one where the structure is a little bit odd, because instead of being told from the point of view of the young man, Elvis, it's told from his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who is, of course, sums it up quite nicely.
I am the snowman.
I am the villain. Some people would say I am the villain of this here tale.
But I am just a snowman. I make it snow.
Elvis is one of my dancing chickens. And it's a strange way to frame your movie from the point of view of the objective villain. But Baz has never been one to...
It's also kind of strangely done. Like, it starts off with Tom Parker in a hospital bed, jumping out of the hospital bed in a hospital gown, going through a casino gambling.
And then actually addressing the audience.
Yeah, like, some people think I'm the villain, and going around, like, pulling the roulette machine. Yeah, so in a hospital gown.
So it's strange, but I think what's very thankful, is that after the first, let's say, 20 minutes or so of telling it from the point of view of Colonel Tom Parker with all the swirling colours, it does calm down, and it does tell a fairly conventional story about Elvis Presley. And, you know, your mileage will vary, because there are some people for whom biopics just are dull, because there's only so many times you can tell the same story.
I kind of think you can't call this one dull.
Well, quite.
For all its faults.
But there are some people, like, no matter how you frame it, no matter how you try to change up the rules, a biopic is just never going to be for them. And I'm not one of those people. I'm more agnostic. I mean, it really does depend on the quality of telling the same old story. But
whereas I quite like a biopic.
Yeah,
I can be like sold by quite a bad... I mean, if it's like Bohemian Rhapsody bad, then I can't quite be sold by it. But I can be sold by a middling...
A middling biopic works for you. And for me, it really does have to be a very good biopic for me to be swept along. Because it's just not my thing. But I'm also not someone who really kind of detests it as well. And I think what really helps is that Austin Butler as Elvis is fantastic. He gets the voice, he gets the swagger, his eyes are very soulful. He really does play Elvis to within an inch of his life. So even when they are going through the steps, the conventional steps, because at some point I did think about, do you remember that sketch in Father Ted where they do the dress up?
Yeah, well, I think we both turned to each other and did that.
Yeah.
We were like...
Elvis Presley was a truck driver from America. Then he went into the army. Then he got out. And then he became the king of rock and roll. And it does tell the story in very kind of da-da-da-da-da-da sort of steps. But the kinetic camera work, after it's calmed down, it's too kinetic at the start.
Oh, yeah.
Too kinetic, but it never stops being kinetic. So the kinetic camera work and cinematography and the editing, once it finds its rhythm after that first half an hour, it stops it from being just da-da-da-da-da-da-da, even if the scripts and story beats are very much just step by step by step by step by step. And then you have Austin Butler really selling it to you. And a good biopic does depend on the quality of its lead star. And I know that, Johnny, I know you especially are not a fan of Tom Hanks, whereas I don't like him in this film, but I after a while I just find, fine, that's what he's doing. He's in horrible makeup and he's got a stick-on rubber nose and he's doing, I am the villain of this here tale. And it's annoying, but I wasn't too bothered by it, and I know you were. But so fortunately, you have enough kinetic energy and fun and, of course, good music and a very commanding central performance to kind of sell a very conventional tale. The Baz Luhrmann stuff, after he just calms down a bit, is actually a help rather than a hindrance. So what did you think of Elvis?
I think that Austin Butler should win the Oscar this year. I think his performance is absolutely stunning. I think he hits Elvis perfectly on, like, it's perfect. Like, I couldn't imagine anyone better. And he elevates what is a massively flawed film to a really enjoyable level. And I really enjoyed this film solely down to him. Tom Hanks is fucking appalling in this movie.
I know you were very happy when he got 2 Razzie nominations.
Yeah. Tom Hanks has had a terrible, terrible year. I like Tom Hanks. Everyone likes Tom Hanks. He has made 2 of my least favourite movies I've ever seen in my life and been the worst thing in both of them this year. Sorry, Elvis is not the worst film I've ever seen in my life, but the performance, yeah. It is hammy and dreadful. But I will say that some of the problem with it is he was completely miscast. He should not have been selected for that role. Like, they should have got John Goodman or someone who fits that role better. They should have gone
for a European actor.
Well, that quite possibly, yeah, absolutely. And so I'll give him a little bit of rate from that. And that is one of the biggest flaws of the film, is that he is a real intrinsic structural part of it. And I'm like, you know what? Get rid of him. Let's just have it told. Let's go more walk the line, and we'll have it just told from Austin Butler's point of view. We'll have it a bit more of a straight biopic here and tell it from Austin's point of view. Now, I get it. That doesn't work for Baz Luhrmann. Baz Luhrmann has to have somebody who, like every single Baz Luhrmann film has somebody telling the story as kind of a narrator that they kind of get bored of using halfway through and then remember that they need to use it at the end, because that's what Baz Luhrmann likes to do. If you can't have someone telling a story from the past for 5 minutes at the start, or Nick Carraway sitting in a mental institute back in the good old days with the green light at the end of the bridge, blah, 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 blah. Baz Luhrmann has to do that. Now, I actually like Baz Luhrmann's directing. Apart from, again, I think one of the things with Baz Luhrmann is I don't think he's very good. Sometimes he really is bad at casting his kind of protagonist. I think that's good, because Austin Butler is not the protagonist in this.
No, he's even billed second. It's Tom Hanks, Austin Butler.
So Tom Hanks is the protagonist. Terrible. Nick Carraway, Tobey Maguire is not Nick Carraway. Tobey Maguire is way too wet from Nick Carraway. And he seems to always pick a really good secondary. I mean, to be fair, Ewan McGregor, I'm sold on him, but he always seems to pick a really good like secondary person who is kind of that would normally be the protagonist in something. And they're interesting. And I always get the feeling that he's more interested in the secondary person, but uses the primary person as a way to tell the story as almost a crux. And I think that's something that I've seen in a few of his movies.
It could also be said that he is someone who tells, if we're being quite honest, if we scrub away the kinetic, Baz Luhrmann direction, his stories are fairly conventional.
Yeah.
But he is a little bit afraid of being accused of such. So he does puts
the bells and whistles on there.
Bells and whistles on, but he also, how can I twist it at the start just to kind of almost trick people into thinking that this isn't conventional. Like, I can make Nick Carraway, he's in a mental institution. That's a fresh new take. I can tell this from the point of view of Colonel Tom Parker, but only for the first 10 minutes, if we're being honest, and the last 10 minutes. But for the most part, it's a biopic. Straight as an arrow. He seems to almost like wrong-footing the audience. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's an odd affectation that he has, that if you're going to do outlandish and crazy, do outlandish and crazy. If you're going to be conventional. But doing 10 minutes... Don't half-arse it for 5 minutes just to make the audience go, what? Oh, I see. It's a conventional biopic.
Hands down, though, and this is someone who really enjoys the work of Baz Luhrmann, I would have much preferred this film if it was a pretty much straight Austin Butler-led biopic with maybe the occasional twisting camera, or for the glitz and glamour and stuff, the camera's moving around and things works quite well.
And I think it is for 80% of the film. It's just
the first 20 minutes, and then there's a bit when it first arrives into Vegas as well. It goes a bit mad again for like 10 minutes. Like, I'm in Vegas, all the lights, and it's a bit like that for like 10 more minutes. But other than that, it is pretty straight biopic. But then the bit again, as soon as Tom Parker's on the screen, I'm a little bit like, get on with it. And then when Austin Butler's performing, or Austin Butler's talking, or going to Beale Street, or speaking to his family and things, I'm like, yes, this is what I want.
That was very interesting, and it told a more interesting tale about America at that time. Its prudishness, its fear of black people, black music, and the influence of black music on white people, white artists, white audiences. That's interesting.
And then being accepted more for it, and being kind of getting away with it, getting away with doing things that,
rather than having Tom Parker go, I saw in the eyes of that girl when he moved his hips for the first time. Oh my God, shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to hear this story from the eyes of Tom Parker, or he's still my boy, he'll do what he's good.
It's a little bit shady, because, this history knows Tom Parker is the villain.
Yeah.
To the point where it's almost a parody. Anytime you have a shady manager type, we know who that's supposed to be a parody of. Why tell it from his point of view? A man someone who is so exploitative and dangerous and filled in with drugs. Why?
It kind of gives him a bit of a pass, almost, in a way.
It doesn't quite let him off the hook, but it brings up a question of morality. If you're telling it from his point of view, you're almost kind of giving him rope to hang himself with, and that's not good.
No. And then I don't think that they didn't pull it off as well.
No.
I don't think they really made him come out like necessarily the villain. He kind of they gave him enough of a chance to explain away his problem, his misdeeds, shall we say. The other thing that I would say is the ending. They didn't stick the landing. I didn't think they did the last kind of, year of Elvis's life, the real kind of descent. I didn't think they really did that very well. And again, I think that comes back to the whole Tom Parker thing. I think they were letting Tom Parker explain it away as opposed to showing it. And that's so. This is my cliff note, kind of end of my review part of it. Really, there's an amazing central performance by Austin Butler, and the middle 2/3 of the film is great.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree.
But the first 25% and the last 5% of the film, mainly because of Tom Parker, are shit.
And because of Baz Luhrmann sticking all of his
bells and whistles
in that part.
But I think the problem is the most Baz Luhrmann part of it is Tom Parker and all the stuff around him, and that is, and again, that maybe is where the performance isn't necessarily 100% Tom Hanks's fault that it's so bad. It's that he was very poorly directed in that 25-30% of the film. And he had to
be stuck in, quite horrible makeup. Speaking of makeup, one thing I was thankful for, and this is a debate that's going to come back because of the film The Whale and discussions about how ethical it is to stick actors in fat suits. Of course, Tom Hanks is stuck in a fat suit for most of this film. But one thing I was a little bit thankful for is that even when they said, Elvis is gaining loads of weight, they didn't stick Austin Butler.
They just did it with like a bit of face makeup and making him a bit sweaty and stuff.
And then only for the last 5 minutes when it recreates his last concert, and they put a 70s grainy film filter over. So even though he is in a fat suit for a little bit, it's
not a cartoonish one either, is it?
And it's hidden by enough things, and they've held it off for enough time that is that okay? You got away with that.
But I almost think that again goes and shows exactly my point about what's good and bad about this movie. They were quite happy to do that with Tom Parker. They did it for the whole movie. But when it came to Elvis, they did it well, and I think that's it for an Elvis biopic. They got Elvis perfect. Like I couldn't have imagined them doing the Elvis bit of the film better. But a lot of the stuff around that is very heavy, Tom Parker heavy, and goes back almost to that before when we were doing the wrong kid, like the stuff with the family. That's all very kind of like tacked on, and again, they're all manipulated by Tom Parker and shown as being spineless and But again, they never really. They hint at their lives, but they never really, give a 360 view of that and stuff. So the core of the film and the core performance is excellent, and I really, really enjoyed it. But but the bits at the end are a mess, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But having said that, I'd still probably watch it again. I enjoyed the central performance that much.
Very much recommend it. It's certainly worth a watch.
Yeah. Cool. I think that
wraps it up for Elvis.
That one.
Now, we're on to their second film, which is...
After a commercial break.
Yes, sorry. Commercial
Come
break.
on,
get it right.
We've got to pay for these microphones and this electricity with the no money we get from these adverts. We'll be back in a moment.
And welcome back, everybody.
I hope that you enjoyed the thing that they were selling to you.
I'd buy it for $1.
I'd buy it for 10.
That's a RoboCop reference. I'd buy that for $1.
Yeah.
Oh, you did get it.
I did get it.
Okay,
it's also just a general saying.
It is.
Anyway, on from that.
Is it time for the magic? Or reintroduction of the magic?
Well, I think the magic was in the advert, personally.
Oh, yes. It was really magical.
Absolutely. Anyway, on to our second movie of the week. And what was the second movie we watched, Callum?
And the second movie is Love and Mercy. So this film is about 2 chunks of the life of Brian Wilson. So the first part takes place in the mid-60s during the creation of Pet Sounds, the album which arguably is one of the best albums of all time.
Some would say the best.
Yeah, I know someone at this table.
Fairly convinced that it is number one on the album charts of all time.
All the big lists, let's say. But yes, it's certainly up there as one of the most respected albums of all time. And it also depicts the worsening mental health state of Brian Wilson as he's creating that album. And in that section, he is played by Paul Dano, who we've recently seen in the new Batman film as the Riddler. And then it jumps to the 80s as Brian Wilson is now middle-aged, and he's been played by John Cusack, and it's at a point where his mental health has deteriorated quite severely to the point where, actually linking it to Elvis, he is being manipulated by a outside party. So in this case, it's his doctor, Dr. Eugene Landy, who is one of the big villains in rock and roll history for his manipulation of Brian Wilson and the money that he took from him and forcing him to create music when he really, really wasn't in the state to create music. And it's in this section that we're introduced to Melinda Ledbetter, played by Elizabeth Banks, who is a little bit of a contentious figure, not necessarily, certainly not a villain, but her story is certainly, from what I understand, quite exaggerated. And in this part of the story, it's about how she pulls Brian Wilson out from the control of Eugene Landy, although I understand that rock and roll enthusiasts and Beach Boys enthusiasts are, a little bit wobbly on whether or not, or how much she did help. So, Johnny, as someone who I know is a big, huge Beach Boys fan, and especially a big Brian Wilson fan and a huge Pet Sounds fan, what did you think of Love and Mercy?
Do you know what? I actually think it's a really good film to compare with Elvis because I think it has a similar issue. I think the central... So, as you said, there's two Brians, a younger and an older one. Both actually played pretty well, in my opinion. John Cusack playing the older, Paul Dano playing the younger. But the older Brian Wilson is used as a framing device for the kind of the younger Brian Wilson, and the younger Brian Wilson kind of shows you why the older Brian Wilson is like he is now. And I think the young Brian Wilson, played by Paul Dano, is dead on perfection. I genuinely think that part of the film is a 10 out of 10 movie. It is so well done. I like how it's shot and how it looks. The recording sessions were dead on. It's quite interesting looking at what the various Beach Boys said, and pretty much all of them said, yeah, that's basically how I remember it. The only one who was contentious was Mike Love, because he says he never shouted at Brian Wilson, but I've heard the opposite. But other than that, they pretty much all said, no, that segment is dead on. But I think the segment around it is maybe not quite as good. I think John Cusack is very good, and I think he gets kind of the vibe of Brian being quite childlike and stuff very well. I actually think Paul Giamatti is excellent in it. He is just playing Paul Giamatti, but
it's a very cartoony figure. But from what I understand,
that's what he's like.
Eugene Landy was quite a cartoony supervillain.
It's quite interesting actually. When Brian Wilson saw it, he said he was scared for 10 minutes when the character came up. He said it really brought the emotions up and really made him feel like it was what Eugene Landy was like. But yeah, the biggest contention is from the other members of the family. They argue that they had a bigger, if not the main role in rescuing him. It's not that Melinda, wasn't around in that bit, and it wasn't that Eugene didn't try and get them to break up and do all these things. But she wasn't the sole reason. It's not necessarily portrayed that she is the sole reason, because
she certainly tries calling people in order to, so that
and they kind of knock
something.
him away, and then it seems to, then she goes away for a bit, and then he gets out, and
I guess more so exaggerated is probably a better word.
But this is where a problem slightly comes in. Obviously, Brian Wilson is still alive. Obviously, Melinda Ledbetter is still alive. Luckily, Eugene Landy's not. But because of that kind of situation and them still being alive, there's either two ways you go. You go down the route of making a massively unauthorised biopic, which is nothing to do with them, and then you always struggle to get the rights for the music and things. They've gone another way. They've gone down the way of getting them to be involved, and obviously to get involved, you can tell they've manicured around the edges to get the story they want told. I'm not necessarily saying they had like full creative control and stuff, and it doesn't sound like they did. They certainly didn't have like final cut or anything on it. But I do think that maybe they told that story in a simplified kind of way that maybe doesn't work.
It's a more conventional narrative, certainly, because you need a hero, which is Melinda, rather than what in real life was probably many heroes, groups of people.
Well, which she was probably one.
She was certainly one. We're certainly not trying to slander Melinda here. She was probably very much
and they're still married
in saving Brian Wilson, but so too probably with the rest of the family.
Yeah, but actually, overall, I think it does a very good job of telling their lives in a very truthful way. I think both the central performances are very good. And actually, a little side note, I really love what Atticus Ross did with the soundtrack and the way that works, and the way that, like, when there's kind of certain, like, dreams on word, but kind of certain sequences, taking little bits of the music and putting that in, and the soundscape that he created. I like how it's shot. So I do think overall it does a really good job of telling that story, and as a whole nuts and bolts film, I think it works really well. What about you?
I certainly agree that the first, not the first, but the younger section is excellent, and the second section, or the older section, is good. It's not like you have one half good, one half bad, a bad film and a good film. You have an excellent film and a pretty good film. And so overall, it makes for a very excellent package. I was looking up the director. His name is Bill Pollard. If you don't know who that is, it's because this is literally the only thing he's directed.
Interesting.
He's a big producer in Hollywood. He's had executive producer credits on things like Brokeback Mountain and loads of things. So he's very much a big player in Hollywood. But as a director, this was clearly a passion project of his. But what that means is that it's directed in a very standard way. And in this instance, I'm quite glad that it is. It's very much a point and click, no flashy camera moves, no sort of flashy editing. It's very much told in someone who is directing a film for the first time, quite standard, unflashy, meat and potatoes direction. And I think in a way that serves the film, because you get the performances to tell the story and deliver it.
I would say, slightly in his defense, I do think there's some interesting editing in the older sects, the young Brian, the 60s sections.
Certainly when he's
recording Smile and stuff, and slightly descending into madness.
Into the madness. I was very impressed with the sound editing and the sound mixing there's a point where his mental illness is being accentuated by the sound at a dinner party of the sound of knives and forks clattering on a plate, and they get louder and louder and louder, and that was very impressive.
I actually think that's on the soundtrack, though. I think that's an Atticus Ross thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, whoever it was a very good decision. I also liked watching the film for a second time, because I saw it in cinemas when it came out, and this is only the second time I've seen it. I appreciated John Cusack more, because I remember at the time it was a big kind of lots of discussion was had about how good Paul Dano was, and there were some people who kind of quite dismissed John Cusack's section. And I found myself very moved this time. There was a moment where he was begging Melinda to leave now, but don't leave him. And I think this might even be the last time I've seen something with John Cusack in that was really excellent before he truly descended into straight to DVD, easy money, which is pretty much his bread and butter these days. And I can't think of the last time. I think this might be the last time where he was truly excellent. And there was a moment right at the end, just before he gets rescued, where he's in a recording studio and he's talking to Melinda, and he's talking about, there's no hope, I can't get out. Actually, I teared up, and I didn't realize just how good his section was, at least from an acting point of view. Because I just remember his section being not quite as good. And it is not quite as good. It's not quite as interesting. And I'd not even necessarily call it a biopic, because it's not telling a nuts and bolts. He was born, he did this, and then he created that album, and then he did that. If it was a nuts and bolts biopic, the section on Pet Sounds would be an important 10 minutes. But the film is so much better for that being a whole half of the movie. And his section with Eugene Landy would have been an important half an hour, something like that. Instead of being a whole half of the movie, the film is so much better for it being two sections just about that thing.
I think that's what it does really well, is that it picks out probably, it's a bit like the Steve Jobs movie actually in the setting structure, in that it picks out the kind of probably two most formulative periods of his life, certainly one creatively and one, that led on to the rest of it. So they pick the period where, and obviously there is a little bit more than just creating pet sounds. There is the showing him having his first initial nervous breakdowns and things and coming off the road and going to record in the studio. And then it kind of focuses predominantly on pet sounds and the production of that. And then as his mental illness gets worse, the kind of going into trying to make good vibrations and then smile. And again, that is that, it shows his kind of creative peak followed by his descent into madness. And then they kind of went, well, actually, we don't need this whole kind of 10 years of him being in bed for 3 years and then starting off with Eugene. We need the bit of him where he gets freed. And then actually, for anyone who knows his career afterwards, had a bit of a creative resurgence and, finished Smile Off and produced a couple of other, like Lucky Old Son and a couple of other albums and things afterwards, and even did some later stuff with the Beach Boys and kind of retoured with them and toured by himself. And you'd like this with a power pop group from LA called the Wondermints, used to go touring with his own stuff. And again, I think, like you almost don't need to know every single part of Elvis was born, and then Elvis went in the army, and that you don't need to know all that. You need to know.
And then he went into the army, and then he got out.
The most interesting parts are the most interesting creative part of his life, and then how that kind of turned into something bad and became the other part, and it did a very good job of doing that. And I think that is something, and it's a nice length as well. It's under 2 hours. Like once you take the credits and things off, probably about an hour and 45 minutes, I reckon.
Roughly, yeah.
Which is a nice length. Like, how many biopics do that? Every biopic, he's had a bloody long life and has done a lot of stuff in it. Like, Pet Sounds was their 11th album. He'd made 11 albums by the time he made Pet Sounds. And they made quite a lot of albums afterwards, even when he was having mental health issues and things. So, and he'd spent the first 5 years of their career touring with them, and they went, what, we don't need all of this. This stuff can be shown in very quick montages, and then let's get into the meat of it. And I think that does a really good job of that and picking that out, and
I'd certainly agree.
Almost being a mood piece in a way.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree. And I'd appreciate if more films about important people did that and picked important moments and focused on that. I also want to mention that a lot of biopics and a lot of films about musicians conflate mental illness and genius, almost to say that this person was mentally ill and it wasn't good, but without it, there would be no genius. And there's a great line in the film Frank where the Donald Gleason character is saying to Frank's parents, I wish I was mentally ill, then I could be a genius. And Frank's parents say, no, if anything, the mental illness stunted the genius, and so few films kind of take that approach. This is a rare exception where it shows that just how creatively, emotionally stunting a oncoming and onset mental illness can be. Like, it totally cut the knees out from under Brian Wilson. And, imagine if he had made Smile when, he wanted to, rather than releasing it 30 years later or something. And I was very appreciative of the fact that they didn't conflate those two things. And it's such a rare thing.
Yeah.
Such a rare thing for films about real life people.
Yeah, no, and I think it did a good job of showing that, and a good job of showing how actually when he was at his most mentally ill, he was his least creative at the end of the day when he was under Landry, but also showing it did a reasonable job. Again, it didn't go into too much depth, but it showed why he went to those places. That at the end of the day, he's quite a sensitive, childlike person, and the later John Cusack version of him shows that just as well as the younger Paul Dano version of him shows that. And obviously a lot of that came partially from his dad being a monster, and partially from kind of a bit of arrested adolescence that comes from being like 16, 17 and being called almost a genius musician because he always was the person that wrote the music for the band, and Carl was the older brother, I want to say. Dennis was the younger brother and he was the middle brother, and they were in their I think late to mid-teens, kind of going down the line. So that you're never going to turn out quite normal if you've got not a great home life anyway, and then you're given like the keys to the kingdom at the age of like 17, 18, whatever. So I think it does a good job of kind of showing the foundations and the groundwork and how that all works. There's a great line in it that, like, when he says about his first wife and how kind of he's sad that it didn't work out and how she saved him, but he was horrible to her because they were just kids when they met, and she was 16 and he was like 18, and yeah.
It's a very sad story. I'm very appreciative of the fact that I'm really not a fan of this era of deep fakes to make young people look young, like The Irishman. You get an old, waddling Robert De Niro, but with a plastic-like face.
It's shiny.
And people are so like, oh, John Cusack doesn't look like Paul Dano. And to my response to that,
doesn't matter.
Who cares?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Is the vibe right?
Is the vibe right? Is the performance right? It's supposed to be about suspension of disbelief. I would much prefer to see a film like this, even with actors that don't sound or look anything alike, but are right for that period of the film. That's what I want. And I think I'm glad that this film is around, because it's probably one of the last times that we'll see a younger and an older person being played like this.
Some people would say we were picking up good vibrations from it.
Hey!
I'm here all night, try the veal.
Tip your waitress.
Anyway, I think that wraps up our reviews of both movies really well. So, Callum-a-Lot, what did you... what score and what did you think of Elvis?
Mostly very, very liked it. Very liked it. Very much liked it.
We now speak English at the end of this podcast.
Yeah, that's where we're getting to that point in the evening. It's a conventional biopic when it calms down, and that's fine. I'm not a problem for me, but there are some people for whom that is a problem. And thankfully, if the film and the performance is good enough, I don't have a problem with that. The first 20 minutes and the last 5 minutes, as we mentioned, were very annoying, but luckily for mostly of a 2 hour plus film, it does calm down to tell a conventional story, and led by a very compelling leading man. He's not my choice for best actor this year. I'm rooting for Colin Farrell, but I
haven't seen Banshees yet, in fairness, so that might change.
But he is certainly deserving of the nomination, and he's certainly at the moment, I think, my second choice. But a conventional biopic is never going to be the thing for me unless it's exceptionally well told. And this is okay told. But it is picked up by a great performance. So I think it's 7 out of 10 for me.
So if I was rating it on the movie Tom Hanks is in, it would be a 4 out of 10 for me, I think. If I was rating it on the film Austin Butler was in, it would be a 9 out of 10. So I'm going to agree with you and say 7. I think it's compelling, it's enjoyable. I would definitely say watch it, but it is a mess, and most of that mess is Colonel Tom Parker.
Some would say I'm the villain of this here tale.
I would agree.
He's certainly the villain of the movie.
Yeah. And for Love and Mercy.
Well, I was very moved by this, and it improved on a rewatch. And I think, like you, the section with Paul Dano is excellent, and the section with John Cusack is good. And together, they make a very strong 8 out of 10 for me. And I noticed on Metacritic, it has a straight 80. And it sounds, to me, 80, or between 7 and 8, that sounds absolutely perfect. So 8 out of 10, because even the stuff that wasn't quite as compelling during the John Cusack section, I think the most moving moments were in the John Cusack section. So that picked it up for me, and the stuff with Paul Dano, who was absolutely terrific. And it was fascinating to see the creation of Pet Sounds wrapped it up for a nice 8 out of 10.
So yeah, this is the third time I've seen it. I saw it in the cinema with you, I think.
You did.
And when it first came out, which shockingly was 9 years ago.
Oh, 2014.
9 years ago. Where has that time gone? And then I watched it again. Must have been a few years ago, because I watched it on BBC iPlayer. And when I went to go and put my BBC iPlayer on, it remembered where the credits were coming up when I first clicked on it. So I've got a feeling I've watched it in this house. So it's probably within the last 2.5 years. And I remember the first time I saw it, I remember actually almost, and I like Elizabeth Banks, but I remember quite disliking that part of the film almost. I remember thinking John Cusack was all right, and I remember really enjoying the Paul Dano bits of the film, just wanting the whole film to be that. And then the second time I watched it, I enjoyed it more consistently through. And then actually this time, I actually think the John Cusack bit has aged very well. I think at the time, and you know, Beach Boys super fan. Oh, it's incorrect. But actually, watching it a more kind of new, you know, I actually think it's a more nuanced performance, and than maybe initially that I thought. So again, I think I work with you. I think it's a good section and an excellent section, and I think the excellent section's almost approaching 5-star, maybe or almost approaching 10 out of 10, probably around a 9. And I think the other bit is a reasonable 6 out of 10. It would still be a watchable movie. There's still considerably worse biopics out there than the other movie that's there. So again, I think I probably actually would agree with you and come out with an 8. So rare occurrence, we've agreed with numbers on both films. But yeah, 8 out of 10. So no, both films watch. Elvis, a joint 7 out of 10, and Love and Mercy, a 8 out of 10. So, and as I said, for those in the UK, Love and Mercy is currently on the iPlayer. So go watch it for free. Until next week, we will someday meet again.
Very vague.
I was going to go into a Dennis Wilson song, and then I thought no one's going to get you. Maybe you will have heard it. So I then quickly jumped out of that.
You aborted it.
Absolutely. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, and have a great week, and we will speak to you soon.
See you around.
Bye-bye.
Bye.